Tonight, everything fell into place. For months, I ignored the signs. The inconsistencies in her stories, the strange transactions on our credit card, the scent of a cologne I didn't wear clinging to her coat. I told myself I was overthinking, that Amy loved me, that we were happy. But tonight, standing outside a grand hotel I had never been to, watching my wife step out of a cab and into the arms of another man, I realized the truth. Amy wasn't just cheating on me. She was living an entirely different life. It started subtly, small things that didn't make sense but were easy to brush off. A last-minute work trip when I knew her office wasn't sending anyone out of town. A diamond bracelet she claimed was a gift from a coworker but never wore at home. A new perfume, heavier, muskier than the soft florals she usually wore. I told myself they were harmless details, that the woman I had loved for 7 years would never betray me. But doubt, once planted, grows like a weed. 3 nights ago, I overheard a conversation. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I had simply walked into the kitchen as Amy spoke softly into her phone, her back turned to me. "I'll see you soon," she had whispered, her voice tinged with something unfamiliar. "I can't wait." She hung up quickly, stiffening when she noticed me. "Just Maya," she said, forcing a smile. "She's having boyfriend troubles again." I nodded. I wanted to believe her. Tonight, I followed her. She said she was meeting Maya for drinks. But instead of heading downtown, she took a cab to the Belmore Hotel, an upscale, 5-star place where I had never once taken her. My hands trembled as I parked a block away, heart hammering against my ribs. Maybe this was a misunderstanding. Maybe I'd walk in and find her sitting at the bar alone, sipping a cocktail and laughing at my paranoia. Then I saw her. She stepped out of the cab, her black dress hugging her curves, her dark hair cascading in waves I didn't recognize, styled differently than the way she usually wore it. A man was already waiting for her near the entrance, tall, well-dressed, with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he wanted. She walked up to him and kissed him. Not a quick peck, not a polite gesture between old friends. This was intimate, passionate, familiar. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Then, as they stepped inside, I heard her laugh. The same laugh she used to save for me. My wife had another life, and I was about to uncover it. I should have stormed in. Should have marched through the Belmore's golden entrance, grabbed her by the wrist, and demanded answers. But I didn't. Instead, I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, watching the woman I thought I knew disappear into the luxury of a life I hadn't known she was living. Amy, my Amy, was a stranger to me now. A part of me wanted to drive away, to go home and pretend I hadn't seen what I just saw. But another part, the part fueled by the slow-burning rage creeping through my veins, knew I couldn't. I needed to see more. I needed to know who she was when she wasn't my wife. So I followed. Inside, the Belmore was a different world, polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers dripping with wealth, a dimly lit lounge where men in tailored suits whispered over glasses of aged whiskey. I wasn't dressed for this place. I felt out of place, exposed, like an imposter trespassing in a world that had no room for the husband she left behind at home. Amy wasn't at the bar. She wasn't in the lobby. Then I spotted her. Through a hallway lined with golden sconces, just past the check-in desk, she stood at the elevator with him, her hand resting casually on his arm, her body leaning into his like it was the most natural thing in the world. The doors slid open. They stepped inside together. And just before they disappeared, I heard it, her voice, sultry and soft, a version of her I had never met. She said one word, but it shattered everything. Elena. Not Amy. Elena. I stared at the closed elevator doors, my breath trapped in my chest. She wasn't just cheating. She had a whole other identity. Amy wasn't Amy. And I was about to find out exactly who my wife really was. I stood frozen in the grand lobby of the Belmore, the name Elena still ringing in my ears. Amy had always been confident, charming, the kind of woman who could walk into any room and make it hers. But Elena, this was different. This was calculated. Designed. I had spent 7 years married to a woman who had an entirely separate existence, a woman who could slip in and out of different names and lives like changing clothes. And now, I needed to know just how deep this deception ran. I hurried to the front desk, forcing a polite smile. "Excuse me, I think my wife just checked in, but I forgot which room she booked." The woman behind the desk glanced up, unimpressed. "Name?" I hesitated. "Amy. Or Elena." "Elena," I said, the name foreign on my tongue. She typed into her computer, then shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't disclose guest information." Of course. I exhaled slowly, keeping my frustration in check. I totally understand. It's just that I was supposed to meet her, and my phone died. Could you at least confirm if she checked in already? The receptionist sighed, giving me the kind of look you give an overbearing husband. I can't say, sir, but the lounge is open to all guests and visitors. Perhaps she's there. It was a brush-off, but at least I wasn't being kicked out. I stepped away, my mind racing. The lounge wasn't where she was. She was upstairs, behind one of those gold-plated doors, slipping out of her black dress for a man who wasn't me. I clenched my fists, pushing away the thought before it consumed me. Then I spotted something, the man she was with earlier. He was sitting in a booth at the far end of the bar, alone, a drink in his hand. Why wasn't he with her? I watched him carefully, studying his easy posture, the slight smirk on his lips. He didn't look like a man who had just taken a woman to bed. He looked like a man who knew something. I needed to know it too. So I walked up to his booth, slid into the seat across from him, and leveled my gaze at him. She's good, isn't she? I said. He raised an eyebrow, amused rather than alarmed. Excuse me. Elena, I said, the name tasting bitter on my tongue. You seem pretty familiar with her. The man chuckled, swirling his drink. You must be new. The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. New? Who are you? I asked, my voice low. He smirked, extending a hand. Eric. And you are? I didn't take his hand. Instead, I said, her husband. For the first time, Eric actually looked surprised. His smirk faltered. Husband? He let out a breathy laugh. Shit. That's a new one. My stomach twisted. You mean? I trailed off, but I already knew what he was about to say. She's been doing this for a while, Eric said, leaning back in his seat, studying me like I was a rare specimen. And trust me, Elena doesn't have a husband. I gritted my teeth. She does. Her name is Amy. Eric's expression darkened slightly. He exhaled, running a hand through his neatly styled hair. Well, that's a first. Usually, she's just playing the rich divorcee role. But if you're really her husband, man, I hate to break it to you, but you're way out of your depth. I swallowed down the anger rising in my chest. Tell me everything. Eric hesitated, then leaned in. And as he began to talk, my world shattered all over again. Amy wasn't just unfaithful. Amy, Elena, was a woman I had never truly known. Eric leaned in, his voice low, I scanning the room like we were sharing state secrets. She's a con artist, he said. A damn good one. I almost laughed. It was a bitter, humorless thing, because Amy, my wife, wasn't some criminal. She was a marketing executive, the woman who spent Sundays in pajamas, binging crime documentaries and complaining about plot holes. Except now, I wasn't so sure. Eric took a sip of his drink, watching me carefully. I've known her for a little over a year. Met her at a networking event. She introduced herself as Elena Carter, recently divorced, looking to rediscover herself. He smirked. She had a whole story, how her ex-husband was some ruthless businessman who cheated on her, drained their accounts, left her with nothing but her charm and resilience. I gritted my teeth. Amy had told me that story before. But it wasn't her story, it was one she had made up to seduce other men. She picks her targets carefully, Eric continued. Usually men with money, influence. People who won't ask too many questions. He gestured around the Belmore. This place is her hunting ground. I shook my head, trying to force the puzzle pieces together. So what? She seduces them? For what? Money. Eric chuckled. Sometimes. But it's not just about that. It's about the thrill. The act. The chase. She doesn't just lie, she becomes the woman they want. I saw her pull it with at least 3 different guys before me. With one, she was a struggling artist looking for inspiration. With another, she was a businesswoman looking for investors. With me. He smirked. She was a woman finally ready to fall in love again. My stomach twisted. I had been in love with Amy for 7 years. But Elena? She was in love every other month. Eric must have seen something on my face, because his smirk faded. Listen, man. I don't know how you didn't see it. But I'll tell you this, if she's married to you, then you're her longest con yet. I exhaled sharply, my pulse hammering in my ears. Amy wasn't just having an affair. She was living them. Over and over, with different men, different identities. A cycle of seduction and deception that I had never even noticed. Because to me, she had always come home. Always kissed me goodnight. Always played the part of the loving wife. Until the next night, when she played someone else. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the polished floor. I needed air. I needed space. I needed out. Eric watched me, a flicker of something like sympathy in his eyes. So what are you gonna do? I didn't answer, because I didn't know yet. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. Not even close. I stumbled out of the Belmore Hotel, the night air biting against my skin. My mind was spinning, churning with images of Amy as Elena, a stranger in my wife's skin. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed to see it for myself. To confront her, to look into her eyes and understand how the woman I had loved for 7 years could lead a double life with such ease. My heart hammered in my chest as I slipped around to the side of the building, scanning for a way up. The fire escape stretched above me like a skeleton of steel, and I climbed it, my palms slick with sweat. I counted the floors as I ascended, trying to remember which one the elevator had stopped on earlier. I reached the 4th floor and peered into the window of the dimly lit hallway. The carpet was a deep maroon, the walls lined with ornate mirrors reflecting the kind of wealth and opulence I never associated with Amy. I stepped onto the ledge and slipped inside, silent and determined. The hallway stretched ahead, doors on either side. I inched forward, listening for voices, for movement, until I heard laughter drifting from a room at the end of the hall. Her laughter. My blood ran cold. I approached the door slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. It was cracked open just enough for me to see inside, and what I saw sent a jolt of rage through me. Amy was standing by the window, a glass of wine in her hand. She was barefoot, wrapped in a silk robe that I had never seen before. And across the room, the man, Eric's replacement, was lounging on the bed, watching her with a satisfied smirk. "You really should just leave him," the man said, his tone casual, as if he were talking about an annoying coworker. "He doesn't know you like this, does he? The real you." Amy, or Elena, smiled, a slow, practiced smile. "It's more complicated than that, love." She took a sip of wine. "Besides, there's something about a double life that makes it all the more exciting, don't you think?" I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I had heard enough. Pushing the door open with deliberate force, I stepped into the room. Amy's smile froze, the color draining from her face as she saw me standing there. The man on the bed sat up, alarm flashing in his eyes. "Daniel," she breathed, her voice trembling. I let the door close behind me. "Or is it Elena now?" I said coldly. "I can't seem to keep up." Her mouth opened, then closed, as if she were struggling to find the right lie to explain this away. The man on the bed looked between us, clearly unsure whether to intervene or run. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his bravado thin. I ignored him, keeping my eyes on her. "You've been living a double life behind my back," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "A different name, a different story, a different man, men. How long were you planning to keep this up, Amy?" She stepped forward, her expression shifting from shock to something harder, more controlled. "I can explain," she said softly. "But not here. Let's go somewhere else." I laughed, the sound bitter and jagged. "Explain? You want to explain how you've been pretending to be a different woman for years? How you've been playing me for a fool while you were busy seducing half this city?" The man finally stood, his face set in a scowl. "Look, I think you should leave." "Sit down." I snapped, my eyes flashing to him. He hesitated, then backed off, sinking onto the edge of the bed. Amy reached out, but I took a step back, refusing to let her touch me. "Don't. You don't get to act like this is some mistake you can fix. This was a choice, Amy, or Elena, or whoever the hell you are now." Tears glistened in her eyes, but I felt nothing but anger. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "You don't understand." "You're right." I cut her off. "I don't understand. But I will." I turned and pointed at the man. "You. What's your name?" He swallowed. "Brian." "Brian, I suggest you leave," I said, my voice cold and even. "Because this conversation is about to get very ugly." Brian grabbed his clothes, shooting a wary glance at Amy before he slipped past me and out the door. Now it was just the two of us. The woman I thought I knew. The stranger I could no longer trust. Amy wrapped her arms around herself, looking small and vulnerable. But I wasn't falling for the act. "Daniel," she pleaded. "Please, let me explain. Then start talking," I said. "Because I swear, if you lie to me again, this is over." Her lips trembled, and for a moment, I saw something crack in her carefully crafted mask. "You were never supposed to find out," she whispered. "Because you're the only real thing I've ever had." But even as she spoke, I could see it, the truth she was still holding back. The lie she had yet to confess. And I knew I was about to uncover the darkest part of her deception. Amy, or Elena, as she called herself in this secret world, stood before me, her silk robe cinched tightly around her waist as if she could hold herself together by sheer force of will. Her eyes searched mine, pleading, calculating. I had seen that look before, but never for me. You were never supposed to find out, she said again, softer this time. I let out a sharp laugh, shaking my head. That's the part you're leading with? Not an apology? Not an explanation, just the fact that I wasn't supposed to know. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Daniel, please, let's talk about this somewhere else. I took a step closer, feeling my pulse hammering in my temples. Why? So you can weave another lie? Another story? Tell me, Amy, or Elena, or whatever name you're using today, how long have you been doing this? How many times have you played the perfect wife at home while sneaking off to be someone else? She flinched at my words, but I wasn't going to let her silence do the talking. Not this time. Tell me the truth, I demanded. Everything. Her breath hitched, her shoulders rising as if the weight of her secrets were finally pressing down on her. Then, at last, she spoke. I didn't start out wanting to lie to you, she said, her voice trembling. I swear, when we got married, I was Amy. I was yours. But she hesitated, running a shaky hand through her dark hair. Somewhere along the way, I realized that wasn't enough. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay still. Not enough. I echoed, my voice low. She swallowed hard. I loved you, Daniel. I do love you. But there was always this part of me that felt caged. Like I was trapped in a life I wasn't sure I wanted. And then one day, it just happened. I was at a business conference, alone, and for the first time in years, I wasn't Daniel's wife. I wasn't anyone's. And it felt good. It felt free. I clenched my jaw. So what? You just became someone else? Decided that marriage wasn't exciting enough, so you created a new life. Amy exhaled shakily. At first, it was just a game. A way to step outside myself, to be someone different for a night. But then, I realized how easy it was. How natural it felt. And I kept doing it. Not because I didn't love you, but because I didn't know who I was without the lies. Her words twisted like a knife in my chest. So you slept with other men because it helped you find yourself? Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. It wasn't about the sex, Daniel. It was about the power. The control. The way they looked at me, the way they wanted me. It was addictive. I stared at her, my breath coming short. And what about me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Did you ever want me, Amy? Or was I just another part of the lie? She shook her head fiercely. You were the only real thing in my life. That's why I always came back to you. I let out a bitter laugh. Right. Because nothing says love like betraying someone over and over again. She took a step toward me, reaching for my hand, but I pulled away. Daniel, please. No, I cut her off. You don't get to ask for anything from me anymore. Her face crumbled, but I felt nothing. For the first time, I saw her for what she truly was, a woman who had never belonged to me. A woman who had built an entire world out of deception, who had fed me lies while slipping into another man's bed. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. I loved you, Amy. I gave you everything. And you chose to throw it all away. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't care. I was done. I turned toward the door, reaching for the handle, but her voice stopped me. There's more, she said, barely above a whisper. I paused. More. She nodded, her lips trembling. You think I only lied to you about this? A chill ran down my spine. I turned back to her, my heart hammering against my ribs. What are you talking about? Her gaze dropped to the floor. There's something else you don't know. Something bigger. I clenched my fists. Then start talking, Amy. She hesitated, then finally lifted her tear-streaked face to meet mine. And when she spoke, my entire world shattered all over again. Amy's lips parted, but no words came at first. She stood there, her silk robe still wrapped tightly around her, looking more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. But I knew better now. Vulnerability was just another tool in her arsenal, another act in this twisted play she had been performing for years. Daniel, she whispered, her voice barely audible. There's something I need to tell you. I crossed my arms. Then say it. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she wiped at the tears streaking her face. She hesitated, closing her eyes like she was gathering the courage to destroy me one last time. And then she said it. I was never supposed to marry you. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. I let out a sharp breath, feeling as if the ground beneath me had cracked open. What the hell does that mean? Her eyes darted to mine, desperate, filled with a strange kind of regret. It started as a lie, she admitted. You and me. All of it. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Amy, my wife, the woman I had built my life around, wasn't just unfaithful. She was a liar from the very beginning. She took a shaky breath, her fingers twisting together. When I met you, I wasn't looking for love. I was looking for a way out. I clenched my fists. Out of what? She exhaled, her gaze darting toward the window, as if she was searching for an escape even now. I used to run in different circles, she said. People who made a living by getting close to the right men. Men with money, men with influence. It wasn't just about sleeping with them, it was about using them. I felt sick. So what was I? I demanded. A mark? A stepping stone? Her lips pressed into a thin line. At first, I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. Jesus Christ, Amy. I wasn't supposed to fall for you, she rushed to say, stepping toward me, but I backed away. You weren't like the others. You weren't rich. You weren't powerful. You were kind. And her voice cracked. I didn't know how to handle that. My stomach twisted in on itself. So you settled for me? I spat. Is that it? You figured, hey, I can't get what I really want, so I might as well play house with this idiot who actually loves me. No, she cried, shaking her head. That's not what happened. I changed, Daniel. I chose you. I married you because I wanted to. But you kept lying, I said coldly. You kept sneaking off, using fake names, playing your little games. So tell me, Amy, what exactly did you choose? She was silent, because we both knew the answer. I turned toward the door, my entire body shaking with fury and betrayal. We're done, I said. Whatever this was, whatever we pretended it was, it's over. Daniel, please. I yanked the door open and stepped out. She didn't follow me, because she knew I wasn't coming back. And for the first time in 7 years, neither was she. I didn't remember walking out of the hotel. Didn't remember taking the stairs instead of the elevator, my legs moving on instinct, as if my body just wanted out. But I did remember the cold air hitting my face the moment I stepped outside. The way the city lights blurred through my unfocused vision. The way my hands were still shaking from the conversation that had just ripped apart the last 7 years of my life. Amy, no, Elena, had never been mine. She had never been anyone's. I leaned against a street lamp, dragging in a deep breath, trying to steady myself. A part of me wanted to scream, to punch something, to hurt the way I was hurting. But instead, I just stood there, staring blankly at the passing cars, feeling like a ghost of the man I was just hours ago. Because in a way, that man was dead now. A sharp laugh escaped me, bitter and hollow. 7 years. 7 years of my life wasted on a woman who had never really existed. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, was nothing more than a mirage, something she had crafted, molded, worn like a second skin. How many times had I looked at her and seen only what she wanted me to see? I reached into my pocket, fingers brushing over my phone. Instinctively, I wanted to call someone. Anyone. I needed to say it out loud to make it real. But who the hell do you call when your entire life has just collapsed? I had no words for this. I could barely even think. But I knew one thing, I wasn't going home. Not to our apartment, not to the bed where she had slept beside me while living 1,000 other lives behind my back. I couldn't stomach the thought of stepping foot inside that place. So instead, I walked. Through streets that blurred together. Past couples holding hands, past strangers laughing outside bars, past places that still belonged to a world that made sense. Until finally, my feet stopped in front of a familiar door. Eric's. The man who had been played by her just like I had. The man who had been a stranger only hours ago, but now felt like the only person in the world who understood. I knocked twice. A moment later, the door swung open, and Eric's eyes widened in surprise. Jesus, man. You look like hell. I let out a breathless laugh, running a hand down my face. Yeah, I think I just crawled out of it. Eric stepped aside, gesturing me in. Come on. You look like you need a drink. And for the first time in hours, I didn't feel completely alone. Eric's apartment was the exact opposite of mine, modern, expensive, the kind of place that screamed success. He had a sleek leather couch, a glass coffee table, and a kitchen that looked like it had never been used. The only thing out of place was the half-empty bottle of whiskey sitting on the counter. He poured 2 glasses without asking, handing me one before sinking into the couch with a sigh. So, he said, swirling his drink, you look like you either want to kill someone or collapse. I took a long sip, the burn of the whiskey grounding me. Both. He smirked. Yeah, I remember that stage. Silence stretched between us for a moment. It was strange, sitting here with a man I had just met, bonded by nothing but the same woman's lies. And yet, I felt more understood in this moment than I had in years. Finally, I spoke. She told me everything. Eric raised an eyebrow. Everything. I let out a bitter laugh. She said our marriage started as a lie. That she never planned to stay with me. That she chose me, but I shook my head, staring down at the amber liquid in my glass. That choice didn't stop her from lying, from cheating, from creating this whole other life right under my nose. Eric exhaled sharply. Yeah, that sounds about right. I looked up at him. How long were you with her? He hesitated before answering. Almost a year. A sharp pang shot through my chest. A year. That meant she had been living this double life for longer than I thought. Longer than I had ever suspected. How did it end? I asked. Eric smirked, but there was no humor in it. She got bored of me. He took another sip of whiskey. I could see it happening in real time. The little shifts. The way she started taking longer to answer texts. The sudden business trips that didn't add up. I confronted her, and she fed me some bullshit about needing space. A week later, I saw her at a bar with some other guy, acting like she'd never even met me. My grip tightened around the glass. She never even looked back? Nope. I exhaled slowly, setting my drink down. Jesus. Eric studied me for a moment, then leaned forward. So what now? I blinked at him. What do you mean? He tilted his head. You're not the type to just walk away from this, are you? A sharp silence settled between us. And he was right. I wasn't. Because Amy hadn't just cheated on me. She had built an entire life around deception. And I couldn't just let her walk away from that unscathed. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. But I knew one thing. This wasn't over. The whiskey burned, but not as much as the truth. I sat in Eric's apartment, staring at the ice melting in my glass, my mind spiraling through every lie Amy had told me. Every stolen moment, every secret identity, every false I love you. I had spent 7 years of my life loving a woman who had never existed, and I couldn't let her get away with it. Eric must have seen something shift in my expression because he leaned forward, eyes sharp. You're planning something, aren't you? I exhaled slowly. I don't know yet. He smirked. You will. And I would. Because Amy, or Elena, had spent years controlling the narrative. She had rewritten reality to fit whatever role she was playing at the time, turning men like me and Eric into nothing more than background characters in her story. But not anymore. Now, I was going to take control. Now, I was going to rewrite the ending. I downed the rest of my drink and stood. I need to go. Eric nodded, watching me closely. Whatever you do, don't let her see it coming. I met his gaze, my jaw tightening. She won't. Then I walked out, stepping into the cold night, my mind already forming a plan. I didn't just want to leave her. I wanted to destroy the fantasy life she had built. And I knew exactly where to start. Revenge wasn't something I had ever considered before. But then again, I had never been betrayed like this. Amy had spent years building a web of lies, seducing men under different names, playing the devoted wife while slipping into another life when I wasn't looking. She had taken everything I believed in and burned it to ash. And I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. I spent the next few days planning, moving carefully, methodically. I didn't just want to confront her. I wanted to dismantle the entire illusion she had created. First, I gathered evidence. With Eric's help, I contacted a few of the men Amy had been involved with. Some were furious. Some were heartbroken. But all of them had one thing in common. They had been played. And they wanted justice just as much as I did. Next, I tracked down her financial records. It wasn't hard. Over the years, I had trusted her with so much that she had become careless. Hidden transactions, secret accounts, extravagant hotel stays. It was all there, waiting to be exposed. Then, I set the stage. I booked a private room at the Belmore Hotel, the same place she had met so many of her lovers. The irony was too perfect. One by one, I invited them, Eric, the men she had deceived, even a few of her colleagues who had unknowingly been part of her fabricated business trips. They all had a role to play. And finally, I invited Amy. A simple text. Meet me at the Belmore. We need to talk. She replied almost immediately. Of course. I'll be there. I love you. I stared at those words for a long time. Once, they would have meant everything to me. Now, they were nothing but empty letters on a screen. I set my phone down. Tomorrow, Amy's carefully crafted world would come crashing down, and I would be the one to light the match. The Belmore Hotel gleamed under the city lights, a palace of deception where Amy, Elena, had lived her second life. But tonight, the lies ended. I arrived early, settling into the private room I had reserved. A long, elegant table stretched before me, wine glasses gleaming under the chandelier. The atmosphere was perfect, luxurious, intimate, the kind of setting where Amy would expect romance. She had no idea what was coming. One by one, the guests arrived. Eric was first, his smirk laced with anticipation. Then came Brian, the man I had caught in her hotel room. Then another, Mark, a businessman she had led on for months. And another. And another. Each man walked in, their faces grim, their anger simmering beneath the surface. By the time we were all seated, it felt like a jury ready to deliver a verdict. Then, finally, she arrived. Amy walked in, draped in a crimson dress, her dark hair falling in perfect waves over her shoulders. She saw me first, and a warm, practiced smile curved her lips. "Daniel," she purred, stepping closer, "what's all this?" Then she noticed the others. Her smile faltered. Her gaze flickered across the room, recognition dawning. Eric, Brian, Mark. Faces she thought she had left behind. Faces that should have never been in the same room together. And then, finally, her eyes locked onto mine. "Daniel," she breathed, her voice unsteady. "What is this?" I leaned back in my chair, watching her mask slip. "Sit," I said calmly. For the first time, she hesitated. I gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table. "You've been playing hostess to a lot of men, Amy. Why stop now?" Her throat bobbed as she swallowed, but she sat. Silence settled over the room. The weight of it pressed down on her, suffocating. Then, I spoke. "I wanted to give you a chance, Amy," I said slowly, my voice level. "A chance to tell the truth. But instead, you kept lying. So now, we're all here. The men you deceived. The people you played. The life you thought you could keep separate." She looked around, her breathing uneven. "I don't know what you think." "Enough," Eric cut in. "We all know." Brian scoffed. "You told me I was the only one. That you were falling for me." Mark shook his head. "You said you were divorced. That you needed me." Amy's hands trembled on the table. She opened her mouth, searching for a way out. A way to twist the truth. But there was none. Not this time. I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "Your financial records. The hotel receipts. The secret accounts. Every lie you ever told. It's all here, Amy." Her face turned pale. I leaned in, my voice low, final. "This is the end. You don't get to rewrite the story this time. You don't get to run." For the first time in her life, Amy had nothing to say. She sat there, frozen, as the life she had built collapsed around her. I stood, straightening my jacket. "Goodbye, Amy." And then I walked away, leaving her alone in a room full of ghosts, the weight of her lies finally crushing her. I didn't look back. Because I was done. Because I was free. The end. If you like this story, please like and subscribe to the channel.